Hi everyone, I'm Adia,
And I'm Jade.
and we are mental health peer educator interns with our University Counseling Center. So today we're going to be doing our Wellness Wednesday, and what that looks like is having a conversational and psychoeducational type of conversation and talk that will be discussing a topic of our choice, and we chose toxic positivity, which firstly we're going to share a definition of what that phrase means because it can sound a little mysterious and confusing. But then we're also going to talk about personal experiences, have a conversation, and just a super chill Wednesday. So, what is toxic positivity? Jade, would you like to start us off?
Yes, I will start us off. So just to basically define toxic positivity, what that can look like is a dismissal of negative emotions. So that's if somebody is going through a hard time or feeling something and somebody is just going to basically invalidate that. It can also look a lot like suppression in a lot of ways. I think that people can use different just things that can be take people's pain and just be able to dismiss it easily. I think a big thing also is it comes with invalidating the realities of those pain and the pain that they're feeling and everything. So.
Absolutely. And we've all been invalidated before, and we're like, what? We are sharing something that's vulnerable and authentic, and we're talking about ourselves, or we're venting, or we're going through an emotional crisis, and someone responding with invalidation is awful, and we feel like we're not being heard, and that we don't matter because we're not being heard, and that we don't have the value to be heard. We also deal with our natural inclination as human beings, which is to be fixers and to provide solutions and positive statements such as "don't worry, be happy," which might be one of my least favorite statements ever. I think it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Moving on. So what that looks like is often we can get in situations where, let's say I'm super upset because I dealt with a loss. And if someone were to say, don't cry, don't be sad, take a walk, stop worrying, you're going to be fine. All of those statements are statements that are commonly thrown around and used, but they not only don't help us, but they actively hurt us. So we don't like that, and that's a part of toxic positivity. And then also there is an element of comparison. We often will compare our situations, we'll internally compare our situations with the situations of others and think about how we shouldn't feel. We get into the shoulds and shouldn'ts. We shouldn't feel upset, we shouldn't feel sad, we shouldn't struggle with our mental health or emotional health because at least we don't ... Like if you are crying, someone's saying, oh, at least you can cry. Or if you got a grade on your test that you're upset with, oh, at least you're not failing the class. All of these things really can invalidate someone, which is exactly what you were talking about, just this idea of dismissing negative emotions.
Yeah, for sure. I think that this is something that I'm sure many people have felt on a daily basis. I know for me, one big just moment that I felt it was, I think I had gone through a really stressful week and it had been hard, with just a buildup of different emotions and different things going on, personal life, at work, just in different situations. And then for me to just, being vulnerable here, just having a breakdown and just not doing well. And then for somebody to kind of come up to me and be like, oh, for me to open up to them and say, I'm just not doing well. And for me to say, this is something that I'm just having a hard time with.
It's a huge thing.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. And for them to they responded by saying, you're fine. And it's all going to be okay. So it was just and I think that it just made me feel if they're saying that I'm supposed to be fine, then I really should be fine. And and then it kind of also put me in the state of getting down on myself and being wow, I should be feeling things. Internalizing, understanding this isn't how I should be feeling. So I'm sure many of you have probably also felt just ways where it's the term you're fine is maybe a term that I use. It's oh, I'm fine. But I think it's helpful. It should people should come to you with that's hard, but like, you know, it's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's hard to get like, it's going to be
100%.
okay. It's going to be okay. Like, I understand that it's going to be okay, but I need you to validate that it's
Of
hard for me.
course, of course. I couldn't agree more. And that kind of goes into the idea of how toxic positivity does not allow for safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
When we have this idea that we need to avoid
Mm-hmm.
and bring shame upon someone if they're not doing okay, we are just feeding into and perpetuating further a culture that is stimulating avoidance and silence. And we don't want that at all. Silence with mental health or silence with any struggle at all is awful and it's detrimental and it doesn't help anyone. And then what I also think about is how everything that we kind of say and do has an underlying assumption.
Mm.
So if we are embracing and if we are tangibly practicing toxic positivity, then we are underlying in an underlying way are sharing that it's not okay to be suffering. And if it's not okay to be suffering, then we're not allowed to be completely open because we all struggle. And if we're not allowed to be completely open, do you see how this continues? If we don't have the ability to be vulnerable, we can't cultivate close relationships and have a security net. And this can lead into this isolation cycle of I'm not allowed to not be okay. Therefore, I have to be fine and be fake. And then I can't be close with people and I'm going to further isolate myself. So this is reinforcing something that is going to lead to that isolation, which we don't want at all.
Yeah, for sure. I think also kind of going off that, just like kind of seeing that, like, you know, emotions can be a complicated and confusing thing, and everybody like deals with their emotions differently. And I think by using toxic positivity, it makes people kind of puts people in a box. And it makes people be like, okay, these are there's one way to, I think you had put it earlier that you said that it makes them black and white. You know, it there's like this gray area that we need to look at, which maybe you can explain more in a little bit, but just like it tends to oversimplify things when like this situations can look different for everyone, and it can be something that people can say I like even be confused at in themselves, like and just yeah, I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more.
No, 100%. It's creating the situation where we're not allowed to embrace the complexity of our human nature and the complexity of the human experience, which is deeply rooted in emotional experiences that come and go. Emotions come and go. And so we are way oversimplifying this topic when we're just kind of viewing it in this way, or even like trying to hide the fact that pain exists in the world by saying like, oh no, it's fine, or like, no, you smile, just smile. I've heard people have told me that. I mean, that's some of my experience. I know so many times with my personality, I seem to be like, you know, more bubbly and more outgoing, which I am, I guess, because I like love people and I love to just be out there and have fun in the world. But sometimes when I'm a little more reserved, or if I am kind of, I don't know, just like upset, or let's say I'm crying, and that will spark this really intense emotional reaction from people, not necessarily when they're like really deeply caring and saying, hey, what's going on? But when they're like, oh, just smile. You're such a smiley person. Why don't you just smile? Smiling saves everything. Don't worry, be happy. And I'm like, well, I am going to worry because I have to embrace and move through my pain before I even move forward and like move on. So not a fan. There are a lot of things we're not a fan of.
Yes.
And if there's anything that you can get from this talk, it's that we want to deviate heavily from toxic positivity. Like we want to leave toxic positivity far away, far away. And I'm just kind of wondering, so as we are spotlighting the deficiencies within a lot of systems and organizations, and we've done that like in different Wellness Wednesdays, and just kind of when you advocate for mental health, you talk about like individual initiative, which we talked about, but also we talk about like systemic action and like just how systems work and how systems affect us. I am coming back to this idea of toxic positivity in our community, specifically the Christian community, but also APU. So maybe we can talk about toxic positivity in the Christian community, and then maybe a little bit about the APU community and our personal experiences, which I'm sure we have a multitude of. anything that you are kind of thinking about, like the church as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's really easy. I'm a Christian myself, and I 100% believe in leaning on God in things. But I think it can be hard when people can say, "Just give it to God. I take my issues and I just give it to God, and then it's fine."
Yeah.
And I think that there, of course, like give it to God, but that doesn't necessarily make your problems go away. I don't think that the Lord, like, He works in different ways.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to recognize, like, for me, I just know it's been hard when, like, I've gone through like the loss of a family member, or just like even just like just like harder situations in my
Of
life.
course. Yeah.
And then for people to just be like, oh, just pray about it, just give it to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think understanding someone's intention behind that is probably good,
Yeah.
but I think it can be really hard to get around that,
Mm-hmm.
because understanding that, like, just by saying that makes me feel like, oh, so like there's nothing I can do. And then it also can create this blame on God if it doesn't get automatically fixed, because if I just give it to God and nothing happens, then clearly a person is going to think like, oh, well, then it's God's fault. So I think it's easy to put that blame there. So yeah, I'd say that's some of my personal experience, and I'm sure many people have gotten that. Just pray about it. Just give it to God.
Yeah, 100%. And unfortunately, often how the church acts is indirectly and subconsciously a reflection of how we view the nature of God. And that's where it gets inherently problematic, because when we look at God, who is our ultimate depiction of empathy, who's came as a being on earth, who became the propitiation for the brokenness of all of humanity, who like Jesus wept. That is a verse in the Bible, shortest verse. And like he walked alongside people in their pain. And I even think of like King David in the Psalms, which the majority of the Psalms consist of laments, and David just crying out to the Lord, and the Lord's not just like, oh, you prayed, so fixing the situation because I'm a genie. No, that's not how he works. If we view him in that way, that's a whole other theological issue, which we'll get into not in this talk. But he has like what clinical psychologists would consider today to be major depressive disorder, and like clinical depression and other clinical mental health issues. And I just kind of think of that, and like I really just come back to like, where is the nature of God in all of this, and like how are we misrepresenting the nature of God? And I don't think saying things like be joyful and like true, like just be joyful because we're Christians and like just be happy is necessarily a good thing. And it also doesn't equate. What joy truly is, true joy in the Lord, or like true hope, true peace, those are not contingent on circumstances, which therefore mean that we can have the joy of the Lord, or like this theological concept, the spiritual concept of joy and hope and peace. We can have those, but we can also be anxious. We can also deal with mental health issues. We can also struggle in our faith. We can all of these things. So true joy is not just these band-aid statements and false realities of, oh no, you're actually totally fine, when in reality you're not. We like in the faith that we both are saying that we adhere to, we're like walking alongside a God who meets us exactly where we are, and doesn't want us to be like this, deity and come perfectly towards him. And and like, yes, we can pray, yes, we can do that, yes, we should, like, that's really cool that we have that like access to God in our faith. But also, is that going to help someone in the middle of a crisis to have like a theological, philosophical discussion? So we also wanted to talk about how this might reflect into the APU community. I see this a lot personally. I see this a lot where we kind of in this community have made it so that we are not able to like just express ourselves in an, I don't know, natural way, or there is that like burden paired with like the fact that it's a Christian community and that all of these things we just talked about at the church. Do you feel like you've dealt with that at APU at all?
I think that I think it's just easy to get into that constant like be joyful, and like we focus on like working in community, so I think it can be easy to like focus on like the positive. So yeah, I would say in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I even think of like normal conversations where you're like, how are you? Great. How are you? Great. Oh, great. It's kind of like this false sense of security that we get when like we're having those types of surface level conversations. And I think that is a part of toxic positivity as well. So maybe we could talk a little bit about what true positivity is, and how we can kind of go about counteracting toxic positivity with actual deep positivity.
Yeah, so that was a lot of information about just like bad, toxic positivity. So we just want to like say how like maybe you can like just some tips and tricks that we have, so I think a big one is acknowledging the pain. And I think it's very important to never invalidate someone's feelings, to understand that like we all work through things differently, to understand that we're all going through different things, and maybe even if it's something that maybe you don't feel that like you're like, oh, maybe I won't feel that way, that's not something we need to express, it's something that we can say that it's okay that you're feeling this way, and to make sure that the person that we're talking to and the person that maybe we're coming to is just able to understand that. I think also in terms of just being an empath, people say, and having empathy for that person, and being able to kind of understand where they're coming from and their emotions, and be able to talk them through that, and just allowing them to have their voice is just really important.
Yeah, no, you got everything that I could even think in my head. People being allowed to have a safe space where their voice is heard and understood and like empathized with is beautiful, and we want to cultivate that in our community. We want to cultivate that in our lives. We want to cultivate that everywhere we go, honestly. And I think even if maybe if I'm having a conversation with a friend and if I'm upset and they're like, don't worry, you're fine, maybe I can even, not that the burden should be on me because I'm not the one at fault here, but maybe I can even be like, hey, so I know that you're saying don't worry, be happy, but in actuality, that literally doesn't help me. Like, you saying don't worry did not turn off the like cortisol running through my brain right now and the stress. And also you're kind of making it sound like I have to be like smiling, you know? So maybe even that, or like if we hear it, like with what you were saying, if you're breaking down and someone is just saying like, oh, you're fine, maybe even having that conversation of like, hey, I know ultimately, that's where like the ultimate hope comes from. We're like, ultimately, yes, I do know that things are going to be okay, and I can rest in that. But right now I'm like, and I just want support. So even communicating that could be really cool. But I do want to emphasize that's like not a burden that we have to place on ourselves. Taking care of yourself and your mental health is the utmost priority. But if you feel like you have the capacity to be able to have that conversation, maybe that's even something that can be done.
Yeah. And I think just like if somebody comes to you like with like a situation, it's important for you to listen and for you to make sure that you're truly being able to say like, I'm here for you and I want what's best for you. So like I will be there to listen. And like, cause sometimes people just need somebody to process with. And sometimes processing doesn't mean it'll be good. That's not what they need. Sometimes they just need somebody to be like, I want you to hear me. I want you to understand me. And so I think that's a big thing as well.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think it's really good that we're just spotlighting this. We don't think about toxic positivity a lot, or maybe we do, but we don't accentuate it, or we don't call it. Yeah, exactly. Call it for what it is. And I'm happy that we're kind of able to do this because it lets a lot out into the light. And I'm really hoping that this can make a difference for you in your own like thought life, but also in your interactions with people. So I guess thanks for letting us share about toxic positivity. We'd love to like chat if you see us around campus, or anything like that, honestly, we love to talk about this topic. We both are talkers. I will
definitely.
say
100%.
this is Miss Upcoming Vice President
my goodness.
here. And I just like to talk. So
it's a great time.
We'll just start a convo about this, about anything. Please do.
Yes.
Now we're like talking about like
I know.
now we're
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday.